beneath the soft hum of a midnight storm, where the air trembled with quiet anticipation, begins tonight's bedtime story. A relaxing sleep story, a guided sleep meditation told by me, Evelyn Blackwood, from Midnight Murmurs Radio. Close your eyes and listen, dear dreamer, as we wander together into the forgotten attic, a place where time once whispered and silence remembers everything we tried to forget. Before we begin, let your body settle. Sink into the mattress beneath you. Loosen your shoulders. Breathe in slowly through your nose and exhale gently through your lips. Again, in and out. Let the rhythm of your breath carry away the weight of today. Imagine the world outside fading, replaced by the sound of soft rain against an old window pane. You are safe here. You are home in this moment, with nothing left to do but drift. Our story begins in a small New England town, the kind that clings to autumn like a memory it cannot release. Wooden houses lean into the wind, their chimneys breathing faint curls of smoke into the fog. At the edge of town stands a house that no one truly owns. Anymore a house the locals call the Holloway Place. Its shutters hang crooked, its porch sighs with age, and its attic window glows faintly even when the rest of the house sleeps in darkness. Many years ago, a family lived there. They were quiet people, proper and polite, known for their antique shop downtown where clocks, mirrors, and forgotten trinkets from another century waited for new hands to claim them. But after the winter of 1912, the shop closed, the family vanished, and the house was left behind, locked, sealed, untouched, or so people thought. Tonight, the rain falls harder. A young woman named Clara steps from her car, umbrella trembling in the wind. She has inherited the Holloway Place from a distant relative whose name she barely recognizes. She isn't sure why she came. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps the hope of finding something of value, or maybe something less tangible, like a fragment of belonging. The key in her hand feels cold, older than the door it fits. When it turns, the house exhales a long sigh of dust and air that smells of cedar, old paper, and time itself. She walks through rooms that seem to remember her before she remembers them. Wallpaper blooms with faded roses, and the floorboards creak, like they're speaking a language only ghosts understand. The storm outside beats against the glass, but inside, everything is still except the faintest sound above her, a single soft thump, followed by another. It comes from the attic. Clara pauses at the foot of the narrow staircase that winds upward behind a small door in the hallway. Her flashlight flickers, throwing pale circles on the wall. The air grows colder with each step, the scent of rain replaced by something drier dust, old linen, forgotten perfume. She reaches the top. The attic stretches wide beneath the slanted roof, filled with covered furniture, trunks, and boxers tied with fraying ribbons. Cobwebs shimmer like lace in the thin light. She feels a strange calmness, as Stug says, intruding not on danger, but on memory. The storm's thunder rolls distantly, softened by the walls. She moves toward a trunk near the center of the room, its lock half broken, its lid slightly open. Inside, she finds photographs, sepia faces, long gone, and in one of them, a little girl stands by the attic window, holding a music box shaped like a crescent moon. Clara turns, her flashlight trembling on the beam that cuts through the attic air. The same music box rests there, now faintly shimmering with age. She reaches for it. The lid opens with a sigh, and the softest melody begins to play, one that seems impossibly familiar, like a lullaby her mother might have hummed long ago. The melody drifts through the attic, gentle and mournful, filling every shadow with a quiet ache. Then she hears it, another sound behind her. This time, the faint creak of floorboards, and the whisper of a child's laughter, distant but close enough to stir the air. Clara's breath catches, yet she doesn't move. Something about this sound feels neither threatening nor candid, simply lonely. She closes the music box, and the attic grows still again. But as she turns toward the stairs, her eyes catch the dusty mirror leaning against the wall. In its reflection, the attic looks the same except for one detail. The little girl from the photograph now stands by the window, watching her. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Asterisk. Outside, the storm murmured like an old storyteller, its voice threading through the eaves of the house. Inside, Clara remained frozen, the beam of her flashlight trembling in her grasp as she stared at the reflection. The little girl by the attic window didn't move, she just stood there, pale and still, her outline blurred by time, her eyes almost too sad to be frightening. Then, as a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, the reflection blinked. And just like that, the girl was gone. Clara turned sharply, her breath shallow, but the attic was empty once more. Only the whisper of rain against the roof and the slow ticking of her watch filled the silence. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination fatigue, maybe, or the strange mood of the house, yet something deep inside whispered otherwise. The air up there felt charged, thick with memory. Clara moved toward the attic window where the girl had stood in the photo. Outside, the street lamps glowed faintly through the mist, their light barely reaching the long, untrimmed garden below. She placed her hand on the dusty frame. The glass was cold, almost too cold, as if the night itself was pressing its face against it. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in the reflection, again a fleeting shadow, like someone passing behind her. But when she turned, there was only the slow sway of a laced curtain caught in a draft. On a small table near the window, she noticed a book, thick and leather-bound, edges eaten by time. She wiped off the dust and opened it. It wasn't a diary, nor a novel, but a ligerose of names and dates, written in looping cursive. The ink had browned, the pages fragile as dried leaves. Near the top of one page, her flashlight caught a name, Eleanor Aldridge, October 31st, 1911. Halloween. The date struck her oddly, and as she flipped through the following pages, the entries stopped. Abruptly, no notes, no records, just a blank silence stretching through the rest of the book. Then, faintly, at the very end, written in trembling ink, "The attic remembers." The words sent a chill through her. She could almost hear them echo in her head, carried on the same rhythm as the rain. The attic remembers. What did it mean? She traced the letters with her fingertip, feeling the grooves pressed deep into the page, as if written in haste or fear. A sudden gust pushed through the attic, lifting the old curtains. The candle Clara had lit moments ago flickered wildly, then steadied again, though she was sure she hadn't brought any candle up here. The small flame burned in the corner of the room, atop an antique holder that hadn't been there before, or perhaps it had, hidden beneath shadow and memory. She walked closer. The candlelight threw soft shapes on the wall, silhouettes of forgotten toys, broken chairs, and the old mirror. Her reflection seemed to shimmer within it, slightly delayed, as though it was waiting for her to move first. She whispered, half to herself, half to the house. "Who are you?" The attic creaked in reply, a low, tired sound. Something shifted near the trunk, the same one she had opened earlier. She stepped closer, every movement careful. The lid had fallen shut, though she was certain she had left it open. She reached out, heart pounding softly in her chest, and lifted it again. Inside, the photographs had scattered. On top of them a new one lay face down. She picked it up. The paper felt damp, as though touched by the rain that had never reached this far inside. When she turned it over, her pulse quickened. It was a picture of the attic, again. But this time someone else was in it, a woman in a long dress, standing near the mirror, her head slightly bowed, her hand resting on the same trunk Clara now touched. The edges of the photograph were darker, blurred, as though the image itself had aged too fast. Thunder shook the sky. The candle went out. In the dark, Clara could still smell the faint trace of burning wax, and something else, faint but persistent, the scent of old perfume. She remembered the smell from before, when she had first opened the attic door. Now it surrounded her, gentle yet inescapable. The floor beneath her creaked again, this time closer. The soft sound of a footstep, slow and deliberate. Clara's flashlight flickered, then steadied, its beam slicing through the dust-filled air. There, at the far end of the attic, the mirror reflected a translucent, swaying slightly, as if caught between breath and silence. The woman from the photograph was standing there now, her face still hidden by shadow. Clara felt fear. Yes, but more than that, she felt sorrow. The same ache that lingered in the music box melody, the same hush in the ledger's empty pages. This house wasn't angry, it was grieving, and somehow she was part of what it remembered. Outside, the storm began to soften, its voice growing fainter as if the night itself was listening. Clara stood still, unable to look away from the mirror. The figure raised her head slowly, and though the face remained obscured, Clara felt an unmistakable sensation, the pull of recognition, like a name she used to know but had forgotten. That somewhere deep in the house below, a door opened with a long sigh. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The house had a heartbeat now, slow, deliberate, and strangely human. Clara descended from the attic with a flashlight trembling in her hand, its narrow beam cutting across the faded wallpaper as she moved through the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself had thickened with memory. The scent of lavender lingered behind her, following like a quiet shadow. Downstairs, The light from the storm outside flickered across the parlor windows, painting ghostly patterns on the wooden floor. She paused near the bottom of the staircase, listening. Somewhere deep within the house, a faint melody began to play the same lullaby from the attic, soft and distant, as if carried through walls by a gentle wind. But the music box was still in her bag. She checked, her fingers brushing its cool metal surface. It wasn't playing. The music was coming from somewhere else. Clara followed the sound through a narrow hallway that led toward what must have been the sitting room. The furniture was draped in white sheets, their folds shifting slightly in the draft. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, she saw a photograph in a tarnished silver frame, a family portrait, almost identical to one she'd found upstairs. Mr. and Mrs. Aldridge stood proudly with their young daughter between them. But this photograph was different. The little girl's face had been scratched out, her features erased by jagged marks, as if someone had tried to remove her from memory. The melody grew clearer, drifting from behind a closed door to the left. Clara hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The air was colder here, tinged with something metallic, perhaps the smell of old iron or rain seeping through the chimney. She turned the knob. That inside was a small sitting parlor, untouched by time. Dust hung in the air like mist, and in the center of the room sat an antique phonograph. Its brass horn gleamed faintly in the dim light, the record spinning slowly on its own. The song playing was the same lullaby, the same haunting tune from the music box, but no one was here to wind it. Clara stepped closer. Her reflection curved across the horn's polished surface, warping and shimmering. The record crackled. 10 faltered, and through that static, she thought she heard a voice, faint, almost tender, whispering her name. Clara. The record stopped. Silence. The phonograph needle lifted on its own and rested gently back in place. Clara's heart thudded once, hard enough to echo in her ears. She whispered into the stillness, "Who's there?" For a moment, nothing replied. Then came a sound from upstairs, 3 slow knocks on the attic floor. Not random, not accidental. 3. Deliberate, steady. Like an answer, her body stiffened. The same cold air from before swept through the hallway, tugging lightly at her hair, rustling the corner of a curtain. She backed away, but her eyes were drawn toward the staircase again, where the shadow shifted with the flicker of lightning outside. Something was there. A faint silhouette at the top of the stairs, a woman's shape, motionless, watching. Clara's throat tightened. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the empty darkness remained. She needed to leave, yet a strange compulsion rooted her feet. Something in the house didn't want air gone, not with so many things left unsaid. She found herself whispering again, this time softer. "What do you want me to see?" The answer came as a whisper through the walls, almost like a sigh. Looked deeper. The phonograph needle began to spin again, though the record hadn't moved. The melody returned, slower this time, each note dragging like a breath. It filled the space with a kind of mournful warmth, not threatening, but deeply sad. And as Clara listened, she saw something new on the far wall, a faint outline appearing through the dust, like an old stain being revealed by candlelight. It was the shape, of a door. A door she hadn't noticed before. Clara approached. Her hand brushed against the wall, solid, yet not entirely. The wallpaper gave slightly beneath her touch, revealing the edge of a hidden frame. She pressed harder, and the panel shifted inward with a soft click. Cold air rushed out, smelling of earth and stone. Behind it was a narrow passageway leading down into the dark. The music above stopped the instant she stepped closer, as though the house was holding its breath. Clara's flashlight trembled in her grip. She took one deep inhale, then whispered, as if to reassure both herself and whatever might be listening. "I'll find out what you're hiding." The passage descended in a gentle spiral, its wooden steps whispering beneath her weight. Somewhere below, the faintest light glowed, flickering, golden, alive. She followed it downward, each step carrying her farther from the world she knew and deeper into the heart of the forgotten house. And as the storm outside began to fade into quiet mist, a strange peace settled over her fragile but undeniable, as though she were finally walking toward something she had been meant to find all along. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The hidden staircase seemed to breathe beneath Clara's feet, every creak echoing like a voice half swallowed by the earth. The air down there grew cooler with each step, damp with the scent of soil and forgotten rain. Her flashlight's glow slid over the narrow walls-wood, warped by time, streaked with dark stains that might have been water, or something else entirely. She counted the steps without meaning to. 12, 13, 14, and then the passage widened. She emerged into a small cellar she hadn't known existed. A room shaped like a half-forgotten chapel buried beneath the house. Candles sat melted to their holders, their wax pooled like pale tears on the stone floor. Old trunks, crates, and faded linens crowded the corners. But in the center stood a table. Upon it lay a mirror, the same design as the one in the attic, framed in silver, its surface clouded like fog. The faint golden glow she'd seen from above came not from candles, but from the mirror itself, shimmering with a light that seemed alive, breathing softly as though something on the other side was waiting to be seen. Clara felt her pulse rise. The silence was deep. Here not the silence of emptiness, but of listening. She whispered into it. "Is this what you wanted me to find?" The air responded with a long sigh, faint but unmistakable. Dust drifted through the beam of her flashlight like tiny ghosts. She set the light down on the table and leaned closer to the mirror. Her reflection swam slowly into focus, but it wasn't alone. Behind her stood another figure, just slightly out of reach, face turned away. The outline was unmistakably female, dressed in something that shimmered faintly like old silk. Clara turned around. Nothing. Only darkness and stone. But when she looked back into the mirror, the figure had moved closer. The voice came so softly she almost mistook it for thought. "You came back." Clara froze. "Who are you?" she whispered. The mirror's glow pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Then came the faintest image hands, small and delicate, pressing against the inside of the glass. For a moment, the surface rippled, as though made of water. She could see more now. The little girl from the photograph, her pale face barely visible through the shifting mist. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words that Clara couldn't hear. A sudden draft swept through the cellar, scattering the candlelight. The door she'd entered through groaned, slowly closing on its own until the latch caught. The air thickened, vibrating with a hum so low it trembled through her bones. The girl in the mirror pressed harder, her expression desperate now. Clara reached out without thinking, her fingertips brushing the cool glass, then flinched as something warm pulsed beneath it, like the echo of a living heartbeat. Visions surged behind her eyes, a flash of the house, decades ago alive, filled with music and laughter. The Aldrich family hosting a small autumn gathering, lanterns glowing in the yard, the smell of cinnamon and cider floating through open windows. Then a sudden scream, a fall, the shattering of glass. The girl Eleanor running toward the attic, clutching her music box, tears streaking down her cheeks as thunder cracked outside, and a voice shouting her name filled with regret. The vision faded, leaving Clara trembling. She stumbled back, her breath uneven. The mirror had gone still again. Its glow dimmed. Only her own reflection stared back now, pale and shaken. "You're showing me what happened," she whispered. "Why?" Somewhere above, a sound answered her door slamming, followed by the faint, mournful notes of the lullaby once more. But this time, the melody wasn't lonely, it was pleading. Clara gathered her courage and lifted the mirror carefully from the table. It was heavier than it looked, its frame warm to the touch, humming faintly like something alive. The moment she did, a draught rushed past her, and the candle flame stretched toward the stairs as if guiding her back up. The house seemed to want her to return to the attic, to finish what had begun there long ago. She climbed slowly, each step echoing louder than it should, the mirror tucked against her chest. When she reached the top, the attic door was already open. The music box sat in the center of the floor, its lid lifted, the tune still playing, though no hand had wound it. Clara stepped forward, her reflection appearing once more in the old mirror leaning against the wall. But this time, it wasn't alone. The child was there again, standing beside her, and behind the child, a woman tall, solemn, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. Clara recognized her from the photograph in the parlor. Mrs. Aldrich, the mother. Tear welled in Clara's eyes as understanding began to dawn it all at once, but slowly, like morning breaking through fog. The attic hadn't been forgotten. It had been waiting for someone to remember what sorrow had sealed inside. The music box reached its final note. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of peace. The candlelight flickered across the faces in the mirror, mother, child, and stranger, all bound by memory, by the echo of love that refused to die. And as Clara stood there in the quiet, she finally whispered, "You're free now." The reflection smiled, both of them did, and then faded like mist under dawn. The music box stopped. The air grew still. Outside, the first pale light of morning touched the windows, soft and forgiving. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The morning sunlight crept timidly across the floorboards. drawing long golden lines through the dust that still hung suspended in the quiet air. Clara hadn't realized how long she'd been standing there, holding the mirror as if it were something living. The house no longer felt cold. Instead, it hummed softly, almost content, like it had finally exhaled after a century of holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of lavender again, but lighter now, gentle, as though the ghosts of the Aldridges were at last at peace. Clara lowered the mirror onto the attic floor, her hands trembling not from fear this time, but from the weight of what she'd seen. The glass reflected nothing now except the soft light of dawn. She ran her fingertips across its surface and whispered a quiet goodbye, though she wasn't sûre to whom. Maybe to Eleanor, the little girl with the music box. Maybe to Mrs. Aldrich, whose sorrow had lingered like perfume through the years, or maybe to the part of herself that had come here searching for something she couldn't name. Downstairs, the old clock began to tick. It startled her, because she hadn't heard it before, not once since she entered the house. Its rhythm was slow but steady, echoing softly down the hallway like a pulse returning to a long silent heart. She descended the stairs carefully, feeling the warmth of sunlight through the windows for the first time. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world gleamed with that strange brightness that follows a storm, new, fragile, forgiving that. As she moved through the house, details she hadn't noticed before began to emerge. The faint embroidery on the curtains, initials stitched delicately into the corner. EA, the brass doorknob, engraved with the pattern of a crescent moon, just like the one on the music box. Every corner, every piece of furniture seemed to whisper fragments of stories she now understood. The Holloway place wasn't haunted, it was haunted by memory. She paused in the parlor, where the photograph still sat on the mantel. The scratches across the little girl's face seemed softer now, almost faded. As Clara looked closer, she could just make out faint traces of the original image beneath the damage, the curve of a cheek, the outline of a smile. A warmth bloomed quietly in her chest. Then she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Beneath the photograph lay a folded envelope, yellowed with age. Her name was written on it, not Clara Holloway, not her full name, just Clara. The handwriting was delicate, looping the same cursive she'd seen in the ledger. Her pulse quickened. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, brittle but intact. Dearest Clara, it began, if you have found this, then perhaps time has finally brought you home. Our house remembers kindness, it remembers sorrow, too, but it holds both with tenderness. Whatever brought you here, know that you were meant to find what was lost and to forgive what was forgotten. The attic remembers because it must. It keeps what hearts once could not bear. If you hear the lullaby again, do not be afraid. It means peace has returned. We are grateful that you listened. The signature at the bottom read Eleanor Aldridge. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. She didn't understand how Eleanor could have written it for her. How a child from 1911 could know her name or her face or the ache she'd been carrying since her mother passed 2 years before. Yet somehow she felt seen, comforted, as though the letter had been waiting not for anyone, but for her. She looked around the parlor again, the morning light caught in the dust like drifting gold. Somewhere upstairs, The faintest echo of the music box began to play once more, not eerie this time, but soft and tender, like a lullaby whispered to a child who had finally stopped crying. Clara smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she said into the air, her voice trembling but sure. As she stepped outside, the door gave one last sigh behind her, closing gently on its own. The garden was alive with color. The rain had woken every leaf, every petal. She turned back to look at the house one last time in the attic window. For just an instant, she thought she saw them, a woman and a little girl, standing side by side, bathed in golden morning light. They didn't wave. They simply stood there, serene, whole, watching her go. Clara walked toward her car, the envelope held close against her chest. She didn't know if she'd sell the house or keep it. Perhaps she'd restore it, breathe life back into its bones, let laughter fill its rooms again. But she knew one thing for certain: the attic would never be forgotten again. As she started the car, the radio flickered on by itself, catching a soft station hum. And through the static, she could have sworn she heard a voice of Evelyn Blackwood's, voice gentle and slow, saying, "As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep." The melody followed her down the road, fading into the morning mist. The road curved gently through the sleepy town of Waverly Hollow, where the air still shimmered with the scent of wet cedar and the hush that follows rain. Clara drove slowly, her fingers tapping the envelope on her lap, the one signed by Eleanor Aldridge, girl who should have been lost to time, yet somehow reached through it. The rhythm of the wipers, the hum of the tires against the damp road, all felt like the lingering echo of the attic's heartbeat. For a while, she said nothing, just listened to the quiet, letting the world settle around her. It was strange how silence could feel alive once you stopped fearing it. When she finally reached the small bridge overlooking the river, she parked by the railing and stepped out. The water was smooth as glass, carrying the reflection of pale clouds and trembling birch trees. The sky was that delicate gray-blue that only comes after a storm, the kind of color that promises calm without sunlight. Clara leaned against the rail and opened the letter again, reading it slowly, tracing each line with her eyes until the words blurred into something beyond meaning, a message not written in ink, but in feeling. She thought about her mother then, about the lullabies she used to hum when Clara was small, about the attic in her childhood home where she used to hide during summer storms. It had smelled like old wood and forgotten memories, too. Maybe that was why the Holloway attic had called to her. It wasn't just the ghosts of others she'd been chasing, but her own. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her chest until she felt the weight inside her begin to lift, bit by bit, like dust rising through light. A soft breeze rippled through the trees, and with it came the faintest sound of familiar melody. It was the same tune from the music box, carrying itself across the river like a secret whispered through time. She smiled, her tears drying on her cheeks as she listened. It wasn't eerie anymore, it was tender, forgiving. Somewhere far behind her, in the old Holloway house, something had shifted, not vanished but settled. That night, Clara stayed at a small inn by the edge of town. The owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes, gave her a key and said, "That room's always been waiting for someone to come back." The words made Clara pause. "Has anyone else stayed there before?" "Se asked." The woman shook her head, smiling. "Not in a long time, but sometimes when it rains, I hear a lullaby through the walls. I always thought it was the wind." In her room, Clara set the mirror she'd taken from the attic on the dresser. It no longer shimmered with shadows. It reflected only the warm lamplight and her tired but peaceful face. She sat by the window and watched the rain return in soft, steady patterns against the glass. There was no fear, only a stillness that wrapped around her like a blanket. The house in her mind felt quieter too, as though its restless spirit had finally gone to sleep. Before she turned in for the night, she opened her journal and began to write, not about ghosts or mysteries, but about remembering, about the way pain can echo for generations, and how sometimes healing isn't about forgetting, but listening. She ended her entry with one sentence. The attic kept its promise. It remembered until someone was ready to forgive. When she finally lay down, the air in the room smelled faintly of lavender again. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, hearing Evelyn Blackwood's familiar voice drift softly through her thoughts, guiding her as though from a dream. Take a deep breath, my dear listener. Feel the weight of your body sink into the mattress. Let the air move gently through your chest, slow and calm. With every breath, the world outside grows quieter, until only the sound of your heart remains. The rain fell like whispers against the roof. A lullaby for those who stay awake too long, trying to remember what's already forgiven. Clara's breathing slowed. Somewhere, in a place between waking and sleep, she thought she saw the attic door closing, heard the last creak of its hinges, and felt peace move through her like a tide. As the world dimmed, Evelyn's voice returned, gentle, timeless, like it had always been part of the house itself. "As the story fades," she murmured, "allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep." The night held her tenderly. The forgotten attic, once heavy with sorrow, now rested quietly in the rhythm of her dreams. And beyond the silence, the music box played one final note. Everything was still. The next morning arrived soft and golden, the kind of morning that feels like a deep breath after a storm. The town of Waverly Hollow shimmered under a veil of mist. The streets quiet except for the distant hum of church bells and the scent of rain-soaked pine. Clara awoke before dawn, her thoughts already tangled with the letter that lay folded on her nightstand. She'd read it again in the dim light, tracing Eleanor Aldridge's delicate handwriting until the words felt etched beneath her skin. Each sentence carried both comfort and question, as though the message was only half written, the rest left for her to uncover. She couldn't shake the sense that the story wasn't finished, that the attic had shown her peace. Yes, but not truth. There was something deeper waiting beneath the surface, something the Aldridges had hidden in time's quiet corners. Clara packed her bag, slipped the mirror back into its wrapping, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The world was washed clean, and the sky was the pale blue of porcelain. She felt calm, but that calm carried an undercurrent of knowing. The house had opened a door. Now she had to step through it. At the edge of town, she found the Waverly Historical Society, narrow brick building that leaned slightly with age. Inside, The air smelled of dust and pressed paper. A woman behind the desk looked up from a ledger, her glasses perched at the tip of her nose. "Can I help you, dear?" "Say, Haske." Clara hesitated, then showed her the envelope. "I'm looking for information on the Aldridge family," she said softly. "Specifically, Eleanor Aldridge." The woman's expression changed, the faint spark of recognition flickering in her eyes. "Ah," she murmured. "The Aldridge girl. Tragic story. That one." Clara leaned forward. "What happened to her?" The woman took a slow breath, as though pulling memories from the dust. "The Aldridges owned the Holloway estates until 1911. She began. Their daughter, Eleanor, was said to have vanished one winter night. No one ever found her body. Her mother swore she could still hear her laughter in the attic long after the search had ended. Folks said the house grew restless after that." Her eyes met Clara's. "Some say the mother lost her mind. Others say the house did." A chill brushed Clara's spine, not from fear, but recognition. "Did they ever find anything? A clue?" she asked. The woman adjusted her glasses, rifling through a stack of faded records. "There was a diary," she said finally. "Belonged to Mrs. Aldrich, but it was donated decades ago, and most of it was lost in a flood. Only one entry survived." She handed Clara a yellowed page sealed in plastic. The ink had bled at the edges, but the words were legible. "The lullaby began again tonight. I told Eleanor not to follow the music, but she wouldn't listen. She said it wasn't coming from the music box. It was coming from the mirror." Clara's hand trembled as she read the line. "Tea? Mirror?" It wasn't just a remnant of memory. It was the conduit, a relic that bridged grief and time. Her reflection in the plastic sleeve shimmered faintly as the light from the window shifted. And for a heartbeat, she thought she saw the outline of a child's face overlapping her own. But when she blinked, it was gone. The woman's voice broke her trance. "You look pale, dear. You? All right." Clara nodded slowly, folding her hands to steady them. "Yes," she whispered. "It's just a lot to take in." As she left the building, the wind caught the edge of her coat, carrying with it the faint sound of a tune once she thought she'd left behind in the attic. She turned, expecting to see someone humming nearby, but the street was empty. Only the leaves moved, whispering along the cobblestones. She stood still, letting the melody circle her, soft and distant, before fading back into the morning light. Later that afternoon, Clara drove toward the outskirts of town, following a narrow road that led to the old Waverly Cemetery. The graves were scattered beneath sprawling oak trees, their branches heavy with moss. She found the Aldridge headstones near the back, surrounded by ivy and pale wildflowers. There were 2 stones, Margaret Aldridge and Thomas Aldridge, but no marker for Eleanor, just an empty space between them. Clara knelt there, brushing the leaves away. Beneath the soil, she found a small fragment of porcelain piece of a doll's face, its painted eye still bright blue. She held it in her palm and felt the weight of it absurdly delicate, like holding time itself. The wind sighed through the trees, and for a moment she could almost hear a child's laughter echo faintly through the branches. It wasn't frightening, it was wistful, almost longing. She looked toward the horizon, where the Holloway house would be, just a dark silhouette against the fading lights, and whispered, "I'll find out what really happened to you, Eleanor." Eleanor. As the first stars appeared, Clara felt the air shift around her again. The faint scent of lavender returned, twined with the smell of earth and rain. The mirror in her bag vibrated softly, almost imperceptibly, as though something within it stirred at her promise. She didn't open it not yet. Some truths had to be met in darkness. That night, as she returned to the inn, Evelyn Blackwood's voice seemed to hum through the quiet of her room, warm and low, like a lullaby wrapped in shadow. "Take another breath, dear listener," it whispered. "You have stepped through memory's veil. What waits beyond may not be what you expect, but it will be what you need. Let the night carry you there, slowly." Clara lay back, the letter on her chest, the mirror by her side, and for the first time she didn't fight the pull of sleep. Outside the town of Waverly, Hollow breathed quietly under the stars. Somewhere far away, in a forgotten attic, the lullaby began again. Asterisk night draped itself over Waverly Hollow like a velvet curtain, soft and endless. The lamps along the narrow street flickered through the mist, their glow trembling in the wind as though they were afraid of what they might reveal. Clara lay awake in her room at the inn, the faint creak of the floorboards whispering beneath the weight of silence. The mirror sat on the small wooden table by the window, its surface veiled with a thin layer of dust and moonlight. She hadn't dared to touch it since she'd returned from the cemetery, yet she could feel it there, humming with quiet intent, like something waiting to be seen. The letter from Eleanor rested on her chest, a fragile weight. Clara traced the faded ink with her fingertip, her mind returning to the diary fragment, the lullaby, not from the box, but the mirror. The thought made her pulse quicken. The rain had begun again, soft as whispers against the glass, and the innkeeper's radio played a tune. Downstairs, an old instrumental piece that seemed to echo the same melody from the attic, only slower, sadder, like memory remembering itself. Clara rose and crossed to the mirror. The surface seemed darker now, deeper than before, as though it absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. She took a slow breath. "Show me," she whispered, not knowing exactly what she was asking. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the glass began to ripple, faintly at first, like the surface of water stirred by wind. Her reflection wavered and then vanished, replaced by something else, a dimly lit attic, familiar yet changed. The air in the vision shimmered with dust motes suspended like golden embers. A small girl sat on the floor near a chest, her white nightgown glowing faintly in the gloom. Eleanor. Her hair was tied with a blue ribbon, her hands folded around a little porcelain doll with one cracked eye. The music box sat beside her, playing that same endless lullaby. She looked up directly into the mirrors if she saw Clara. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then her expression shifted: fear, confusion, a plea. Asterisk Clara pressed her palm against the glass. "Eleanor? Eleanor?" she whispered. The child's image flickered, and suddenly the scene changed. The attic door burst open, and a woman, Margaret Aldrich, rushed in, her face pale with panic. "Eleanor, stop. Secret. Secret. You mustn't. But the rest of her words drowned beneath the rush of wind that filled the attic. The walls shuddered, and the candles blew out. The mirror in Clara's hands pulsed once, violently. She stumbled back, clutching it as the vision shifted again. Now Eleanor stood alone, staring into the same mirror. Clara, now hale. The music box played faster, the tune unraveling into something frantic and broken. A crack spread across the glass, and a flash of light swallowed the attic hole. Clara gasped, falling to her knees as the glow filled her room, spilling shadows across the walls like liquid memory. When the light faded, she was no longer in the inn. Or perhaps she was but changed. The walls around her were gone, replaced by the familiar rafters of the Holloway attic. The scent of lavender and dust was stronger now, laced with something metallic, old iron, old tears. She turned, heart pounding, and saw the same small figure standing by the window. Eleanor. Her blue ribbon fluttered in the draft. "Why are you showing me this?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she held up the porcelain doll and pointed toward the floorboards. "Near the chest, there," she said, her voice thin and distant, as though spoken through layers of time. Clara hesitated, then knelt, prying up a loose plank. Beneath it, wrapped in a piece of decaying cloth, was a small notebook, its leather cracked and stained. The air shifted as soon as she touched it. The attic silence deepened, as though the house itself held its breath. She opened the cover carefully. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, unmistakably Margaret Aldrich's. The first entry read, "The mirror is not just a reflection, it remembers, it listens. It keeps what the living cannot bear." Clara's fingers tightened around the book. The next entry was dated the night Eleanor vanished. "The lullaby grows louder. She hears it when I cannot. She says the girl in the mirror sings to her. I beg her to stop, but she says the girl is lonely. She says the girl wants her to stay." A cold wind swept through the attic, carrying the faint sound of a child's hum. Clara looked up. Eleanor was still by the window, but now her face was solemn, her eyes reflecting something ancient, too old for a child. "I didn't want to go," she whispered, "but she said I had to stay so no one else would." Clara's throat tightened. "Who? Eleanor, who made you stay?" The girl lifted her hand and pointed toward the mirror. Its surface began to darken again, twisting with light and shadow. For an instant, Clara thought she saw a second figure within a woman's face, sharp and sorrowful, her eyes hollow with grief. It wasn't Eleanor. It wasn't Margaret. It was something else. Something older. The vision began to fade, the edges of the attic dissolving into mist. Clara reached out, but the girl was already disappearing, her outline flickering like candlelight. "Wait, please." "The secret. Secret. How do I free you?" Eleanor's voice came faintly, just before she vanished. "Remember the promise." The attic remembers because it must. Then the light dimmed, and Clara was back in her room at the inn, the mirror cold and still in her hands. Her heart raced, but her fear had softened into something else, a fierce, aching resolve. The lullaby still echoed in the corners of the room, faint and fragile, like a heartbeat buried in silence. Clara pressed her hand over her heart and whispered into the dark, "I'll remember, Eleanor." Promis. Outside, the wind sighed against the window pane, carrying the scent of lavender once more, and far away, somewhere beyond the reach of time, a child's laughter faded softly into the night. Asterisk morning crept slowly over Waverly Hollow, casting pale gold across the rolling hills and rooftops still damp with last night's rain. Clara hadn't slept. The mirror rested on the table beside her bed, wrapped again in its cloth, as though silence could keep what she saw from returning. Yet even through the linen, she could feel a low vibration, a hum like a heartbeat beneath the surface. The girl's voice still echoed faintly in her mind. The attic remembers because it must. By the time the sun had risen, she knew she couldn't leave it there. Something in the way the mirror pulsed felt like an unfinished thought, an invitation. Or perhaps a warning. She made her way to the local library, a weathered stone building with ivy creeping over its walls, its wooden doors carved with faded names of benefactors long gone. Inside, dust hung suspended in the air, lit by slanted beams of morning light. A sense of stillness filled the place, the kind that made every footstep sound like a confession. The town's records clerk, Mr. Whitaker, sat behind a tall counter, sorting brittle documents into neat stacks. He looked up, his expression softening when Clara introduced herself. "The Aldridge House," he said quietly, as though the name itself might disturb the air. "You're not the first to ask about it. Most don't stay interested long." Clara laid the leather journal on the counter. "I found this hidden in the attic," she said. "I think it belonged to Margaret Aldrich." His eyes widened slightly as he took the book, turning it over with reverent care. "Well," he murmured, "you've got quite a piece of the town's ghost there." He motioned for her to follow him into the archive room. The room was dim and cool, filled with shelves of yellowed maps, ledgers, and fading photographs. Mr. Whitaker pulled a box labeled Waverly Historical Events 1911 and set it on the table. "That was the year of the Harvest Festival," he explained. "Biggest celebration we ever had. But it ended poorly." He slid a newspaper from the box and spread it out carefully. The headline read, "Tragedy at Wheatfield Fairchild Missing, Mother Unwell." Clara's breath caught. Beneath the headline was a grainy photograph of a crowd gathered near a bonfire. At the center stood Margaret Aldridge, her face ghostly pale, one arm reaching as though to shield something behind her. "That was the last night anyone saw Eleanor," Whitaker said softly. "She vanished during the lantern ceremony. Some said she wandered into the woods. Others whispered about the mirror." Clara looked up sharply. "The mirror. The mirror. Nodded. The Aldridges were known for their collection of old things. Margaret's husband had brought a mirror from a seafaring trip of Venetian glass, older than anyone could trace. Local superstition said it was once part of a church that burned in the late 1600s, and that it reflected not faces, but souls. Paus, his gaze drifting toward the window where rain had begun to fall again. Margaret said the mirror was a gift meant to protect the house, but some protections demand something in return. Clara ran her hand over the edge of the newspaper, her thoughts churning. So the mirror didn't belong to the Aldridges originally. No, he replied. But after the festival, no one saw it again. Some believed Margaret smashed it. Others claimed it swallowed her daughter whole. All I know is the next morning, the house's windows were dark and the music from the attic stopped forever. Clara stared at the photograph, her pulse steady but deep. Behind the crowd, she noticed something strange, a faint blur, near the edge of the bonfire, shaped like a small figure turned toward her. The camera, the image wasn't clear, but its outline shimmered, distorted, as if caught mid-motion. She traced it lightly with her finger, feeling the chill beneath her skin. Mr. Whitaker noticed her hesitation. "You see it too," he said quietly. "Everyone does, eventually. Some say the firelight caught the glass just right, and the mirror reflected something that wasn't supposed to be there." The clock in the corner ticked once, twice, then seemed to fade beneath the slow patter of rain. Clara's mind spiraled back to the attic, the music box, the lavender scent, the way the air bent around the mirror, as if time itself leaned closer to listen. The harvest festival, the bonfire, the missing child. It was all a circle, turning endlessly until someone broke it. When she left the library, the town felt different. The streets seemed narrower, the light dimmer, as if the day carried the memory of the night it lost its child. She walked past the old churchyard, where preparations were underway for this year's fall festival. Banners, half pumpkins arranged on wooden steps, laughter echoing faintly through the air. For a moment, it felt as though 1911 had folded over the present, history breathing through the cracks of time. A little girl ran by, chasing a paper lantern that slipped from her hands and floated into the sky. Clara watched it drift upward, its warm glow rising higher until it vanished into the clouds. Her throat tightened. "Juicy? Juicy?" a voice whispered beside her, so close it could have been her own thought. She turned, but no one was there. Only the scent of lavender, faint and familiar. That night, back at the inn, Clara unwrapped the mirror once more. Its surface reflected the candlelight and the outline of her face, but behind her reflection, something faint glimmered, like a flicker of firelight in the distance. She could almost hear the echo of drums, laughter, and the soft ring of children's bells. The festival was calling again, and as the flame wavered, she heard Evelyn Blackwood's whisper drift through the room, steady, low, and soothing. "The past is never silent, dear listener. It hums beneath the world, waiting for a heart brave enough to listen. Breathe slowly now, and let the echoes unfold." Clara closed her eyes. The candle's glow trembled once, then stilled. Somewhere, the music box began to play again, its tune, now layered with another sound, faint but growing clearer, the rhythm of footsteps in the grass, leading her back to where the story first began. The night of the harvest festival arrived beneath a silver sky. The air smelled of roasted apples and cedar smoke, the kind of sweetness that wrapped itself around memory. Lanterns swung from every tree along Waverly Hollow, Main Street, glowing like captured moons. Children laughed, their voices echoing through the cool air, as fiddles and flutes carried an old, lilting tune. Clara stood at the edge of the square, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets, watching the lights shimmer like they were trying to remember something too. The past and present felt thin here, almost touchable, as though the veil that separated them had loosened with the turning of the season. Everywhere she looked, there were small echoes of the photograph from 1911. The stalls lined with jars of honey, the same wooden stage, the same garlands of autumn leaves tied with twine. Even the bonfire pit stood in the same place, surrounded by stones blackened with age. A small chill crawled up her spine. The mirror, safely wrapped in her satchel, seemed to hum softly, as if recognizing the rhythm of the night. Mayor Fielding took the stage and began his welcome speech, his voice cheerful and booming, though Clara barely heard the words. Her eyes had drifted toward the edge of the square, where an old woman sat alone, selling ribbons and charms. The woman's hair was white as frost, her eyes distant yet piercing. When Clara approached, the woman smiled faintly. "You've brought it back," she said in a low, knowing tone. "Clara, Frosse, what do you mean?" The woman tilted her head, her gaze flickering toward the satchel. "Te mirror, the house has been waiting. You can hear it, can't you? It hums when it remembers." Clara's throat tightened. "Who are you?" "Se aske." The woman chuckled softly, her voice like dry leaves brushing against stone. "Names are just reflections. But once they called me Marjorie. My grandmother tended the Aldridge estate after the tragedy. She said the mirror wasn't meant to be seen by those who feared the truth. It shows what the soul hides and what the town has chosen to forget." Before Clara could ask more, a sudden flare of light drew the crowd's attention. The bonfire had been lit, flames spiraling upward in a burst of gold and orange. Music swelled violins, weaving through the wind like whispers from another century. The children danced in a ring, their laughter rising and falling like waves. But as Clara watched, a strange shimmer rippled through the firelight, bending the air around it. For a fleeting moment, the dancers' silhouettes doubled one set of children from this world. Another faint and faded, moving in perfect unison from a world beyond. The crowd didn't seem to notice. Only Clara stood frozen as the reflection of the old festival overlapped with the present one. The same bonfire, the same circle of joy, and at the edge of the flames a woman in a white dress, her face hidden by her hair. Margaret Aldrich. Clara's heart thudded violently in her chest. The vision flickered like an old film reel before dissolving into sparks. She stumbled backward, gripping her satchel, her breath shallow. Marjorie's voice floated toward her, soft but urgent. "If you open it here, you'll see everything." Baton Sesshin. "It cannot be unseen." Clara hesitated, her trembling hands pulling the mirror from its wrappings. The surface gleamed, catching the reflection of the fire. For a moment, all she saw was her own face, but then the glass began to ripple like water, disturbed by wind. Within the shifting depths, images emerged. The festival of 1911 in full bloom, laughter and lanterns, Margaret holding little Eleanor by the hand. Then came the scream, the one Clara had heard only in dreams. The mirror showed Margaret spinning toward the bonfire, reaching desperately as her daughter slipped from her grasp and vanished into the blaze of light. But the fire didn't burn the child. It folded around her, pulling her inward, as if the mirror and the flame were one. Margaret's face twisted in horror, and she turned the mirror upon herself. In that moment, the image shattered into 1,000 fragments each piece, showing a different version of the same night, looping endlessly. Clara gasped, nearly dropping the mirror as a faint echo whispered through the air. The attic remembers because it must. Suddenly, the festival lights flickered. The music faltered. A hush fell over the square. Every flame in the lanterns dimmed to a deep red, and a wind swept through, carrying the faint scent of lavender. The past was bleeding through. The people around her froze in place, their outlines blurring, faces fading into those of another century. Clara stood alone between two overlapping worlds, one bright and alive, the other ghostly and lost. Then, from within the fire, a small voice called her name. Clara. It was soft, fragile, and impossibly familiar. She looked up, eyes wide. In the heart of the flames stood a little girl, her outline glowing faintly, her hair tied with a ribbon that shimmered blue beneath the smoke. Eleanor, Clara whispered. The child tilted her head, smiling faintly. It's cold where we are. Mother said you'd come. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She took one step closer, then another, feeling the heat of the fire lick at her skin. How can I help you? She whispered. But before the girl could answer, Margaret appeared behind her, her form blurred, eyes hollow but kind. You already are, she said, by remembering us. The mirror in Clara's hands glowed brighter, its surface turning almost liquid, reflecting both mother and daughter, as though the glass itself longed to keep them whole. A sudden gust of wind tore through the square, scattering ashen petals into the night. The vision trembled, flickered, then began to fade. Wait! Clara cried, reaching out, but Margaret only smiled sadly. The attic remembers, she whispered again, but so must you. The flames dimmed to embers. The laughter of the festival returned. When Clara blinked, she was alone once more, standing by the dying fire, the mirror cool and silent in her hands. Yet deep within its reflection, she could still see the faint outline of two figures walking hand in hand into the light. Somewhere above, the moon slipped from behind a cloud, washing the square in soft silver. The world felt quiet again, as though it had exhaled after holding its breath for over a century. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the hum of the mirror fade into silence. For the first time, the attic might finally rest. Asterisk, the night after, the festival stretched on like an endless sigh. Waverly Hollow lay silent beneath a quilt of fog, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Clara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of the little girl in the fire, the way her voice had trembled like wind through chimes. The mirror rested on the table beside her bed, dull now, its once glowing surface muted like a sleeping eye. She turned toward it, whispering, "You wanted to be found, didn't you?" The house gave no answer, only the soft groan of its wooden frame settling in the cold. By morning, the fog had not lifted. It clung to the fields and the road leading back to the old Aldridge estate, where the forgotten attic waited. Clara packed her satchel again, though this time she moved slower, aware that something was changing inside her and in the air around her. The townsfolk had returned to their routines, though many spoke of strange dreams after the festival. Some said they saw faces in the bonfire smoke. Others heard music long after the fiddles had stopped, but none spoke of the girl or the mirror. Only Clara carried that burden. When she reached the mansion, the gate was open, as if expecting her. Leaves whispered down from the trees, swirling around her boots in spirals of gold and brown. The door creaked when she pushed it, releasing a stale breath of cedar and dust. The house felt different now, quieter, but also aware. The staircase loomed in the dim light, the same path she had taken before, each step echoing through the hollow halls like a heartbeat. At the top, she paused before the attic door. A faint draft slipped through the cracks, cool and rhythmic, like breathing. She placed her hand on the handle, her reflection glimmering faintly in the mirror's edge as she lifted it. The door opened without resistance. Inside, the air was still, yet charged with something unseen. The light filtered through the round window in thin, silvery beams that caught the dust mid, making it look like starlight suspended in time. Clara stepped inside, her boots brushing across the same floorboards where she had first heard the whispers. But now, the attic seemed less haunted and more sorrowful, a space that had simply waited too long to be remembered. She set the mirror down in its rightful place against the wall. Ersifte, a sound, almost like a sigh of relief, drifted through the room. Then came the faintest melody, a lullaby, fragile and distant, threading through the stillness. As she listened, images flickered faintly around her. Margaret sitting by the window, sewing a small blue ribbon, Eleanor giggling as she played with a wooden doll, sunlight falling in gentle ribbons across the floor. These weren't ghosts, they were memories, echoes of a home before tragedy. Clara could feel warmth rising behind her eyes. "You didn't mean to leave," she whispered. "You were trying to save her." The mirror's surface began to glow again, soft this time, no longer violent or demanding. When Clara gazed into it, she saw not terror but peace. Margaret and Eleanor stood together, bathed in light, their faces serene. Margaret spoke, her voice tender and far away. "You've done what we could not. You gave us back our story." Clara felt tears roll down her cheeks. "It's over, then?" she asked quietly. Margaret smiled faintly. "Not over, just remembered. That's all any soul ever needs." A gust of wind swept through the attic, lifting the curtains and scattering the dust like snowfall. When it settled, the mirror dimmed, reflecting only the quiet room. The figures were gone, but the heaviness that once filled the space had lifted, replaced by a calm that seemed to hum through the walls. The attic no longer felt forgotten. It felt at peace. Clara sat there for a long time, the silence wrapping around her like a soft blanket. Through the small window, dawn was beginning to paint the horizon in shades of gold and lavender. She could hear the first bird calls from the woods beyond, gentle and alive. For the first time, she let herself rest, leaning against the wall, eyes half closed, breathing in the scent of cedar and morning air. The past had released its grip, and in doing so, it had given her something rare: tranquility. Downstairs, the clock in the hall began to chime, its voice steady and slow, each note carried through the house like a heartbeat returning to life. Clara smiled faintly. The sound reminded her of her grandmother's stories, the ones that blurred the line between memory and myth. Perhaps, she thought, they were one and the same dot. As she stood to leave, a glimmer caught her eye, a small blue ribbon resting on the floor by the mirror. She picked it up gently, feeling its fragile threads between her fingers. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room. The light from the window caught the ribbon, turning it momentarily translucent, like a sliver of the morning sky. She placed it inside her journal before walking down the stairs outside. The fog had finally begun to break apart, revealing the outline of the town below, bathed in soft sunlight. The bells from the old church began to toll, their echoes carrying over the fields, through the trees, and up toward the attic window that now stood open. The house seemed to breathe again quietly, gratefully dark. Clara paused at the gate and looked back one last time. The reflection of the attic window caught the light, shimmering like an eye closing after a long, restless dream. She smiled, the corners of her mouth trembling. Then she whispered into the cool morning air, "Rest now." And as she walked down the winding path toward the waking town, her footsteps fell softly upon the earth, each one lighter than the last. Somewhere behind her, the forgotten attic finally fell silent. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The morning unfurled in gentle silence, the kind that follows the passing of a long storm. Waverly Hollow looked almost new beneath the pale autumn sun, its streets washed clean, its windows glinting faintly with dew. Clara walked through the heart of town with the mirror wrapped carefully in linen beneath her arm. It no longer hummed or glowed, but she carried it as one might carry a memory, something fragile, no longer dangerous, yet too meaningful to abandon. The townsfolk greeted her softly as she passed, though most did not know her name. Some nodded, others smiled vaguely, as though sensing some subtle shift they could not explain. The bakery windows were open again, letting out the smell of warm bread and cinnamon. The old clock tower had resumed its steady rhythm, the bells striking each hour with renewed grace. Clara found herself pausing in the square where the festival had been held. The bonfire pit was gone now, only a ring of pale ash remained, faintly glimmering in the morning light. Children ran through it, laughing, their voices bright and unaware. For a moment, she thought she saw a small blue ribbon flutter past her feet, lifted by the wind, but when she blinked, it was gone. She sat down on a bench near the fountain, listening to the slow trickle of water. The sound reminded her of the whispering she'd heard in the attic, soft, rhythmic, endless. It no longer frightened her. If anything, it soothed her. The mirror rested beside her, silent but heavy with what it had witnessed. She thought of Margaret and Eleanor, of how love could stretch beyond time itself, lingering even where it had been broken. That kind of devotion, she realized, was not meant to haunt it, was meant to be remembered. A voice startled her gently from her thoughts. "You went back there, didn't you, Clara?" Turnip. It was Margarita, old woman from the festival, standing with a bundle of dried herbs in her hands. Her eyes, though clouded by age, seemed to hold the same calm certainty as before. Clara nodded. "They're at peace now?" she said quietly. The house feels lighter. Marjorie smiled faintly, setting her herbs down beside the fountain. The past never truly leaves, my dear. It just stops asking to be seen when someone listens. Clara exhaled softly, her breath misting in the cool air. What should I do with it? She asked, glancing toward the mirror. Bury it. Hide it away again. The old woman shook her head. No. Let it see the light for the first time in 100 years. Keep it somewhere gentle. It's not a curse anymore, it's a witness. They sat together in companionable silence for a while, watching as the morning deepened into day. Birds flitted from rooftop to rooftop, and the church bells rang faintly in the distance. When Clara finally rose to leave, Marjorie touched her arm lightly. You remind me of someone, she said with a smile. Someone who once believed every story had to end in sorrow. She was wrong, you know. Clara smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. Maybe she wasn't wrong, she said. Maybe sorrow just teaches us how to notice peace. The old woman's eyes gleamed with quiet approval. Ah, she murmured. Then you've understood. Later, Clara returned to the inn where she had been staying. She opened the window to let in the sunlight, setting the mirror upon the small writing desk. For a moment, the light caught its surface and reflected across the room in tiny fragments of gold. She thought of the attic's window, of how it had looked when she last turned to see it shimmer in the dawn. This light was different, warmer, freer, as if the mirror itself had finally stopped remembering pain and started remembering grace. She took out her journal and wrote a single line at the top of a blank page. Not all forgotten things wish to stay hidden. Then she closed the book and rested her hand over it, feeling a quiet pulse beneath her fingertips. Not from the mirror, but from her own steady heart. The house, the voices, the tradide had all found rest, and so, it seemed, had she. Outside, the wind stirred again, gentle and slow. It passed through the open window, carrying with it the faintest scent of lavender and wood smoke. Clara leaned back in her chair, letting her eyes drift closed. The sound of the fountain echoed softly through the town, blending with the sigh of the breeze and the distant murmur of life returning to its rhythm. Everything felt calm, almost sacred in its simplicity. In that stillness, she thought she heard one last whisper, childlike, almost playful. Good night, Clara. She smiled without opening her eyes. Good night, Eleanor, she whispered back. The mirror caught the last glint of sunlight before dusk fell. Its reflection, soft as a memory, finally set free. And for the first time in over a century, the attic at the edge of Waverly Hollow slept in perfect, dreamless peace. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep.